great to have you all here. And, you know, we're going to talk for a minute or two about the place where everyone is showing their special magic, and that's online and online communities. And in those we're trying to understand what community means when we're operating online, how online tribes form, and when they do, how you get to the chieftains of those tribes. And even more, what makes for an authentic connection to those chieftains. To do that, we have one of the chiefs of an online tribe, and that's John Durant, the founder of Wild Ventures. He's one of the most respected strategic thinkers in the country around online communities. And he's here to talk with us about how brands can work to build relationships with these online tribes and guide us through the main types of influencer relationships that keep them genuine and resonant. So with that, please welcome John Durant.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. It's good to be back in New York. This is where my paleo adventure and CrossFit adventure and barefoot running adventure and cold exposure adventure, many different adventures and many different tribes where it got started. Just as a little bit of background on me, to help us think about tribes and influencers and how brands can work with them, went paleo in 2006 as a personal experiment. That took off in 2010, was involved in a lot of media around it here in New York, and then wrote one of the early books, the Paleo Manifesto, co-authored another book with the founder of Spartan Race, ran in the first Tough Mudder, was in one of the first 20 CrossFit boxes in the country, and I say that just to sort of give a little bit of context on tribe building. And then, you know, organically from that, got into the venture space, not because I had some grand vision of getting into venture capital, but because it sort of bubbled up organically, where founders were reaching out to me of, how do I break into CrossFit? How do I get an introduction to Mark Sisson of Primal Kitchen? How do I get in front of Tim Ferriss? And I'd become friends with a lot of these people, and so I thought, oh, this is sort of an interesting way to connect brands with influencers. So Wild Ventures ended up pre-launch at Thrive Market, Kettle and Fire, Magic Spoon cereal, which just launched a few months ago, and was in the only round at Primal Kitchen. So the word influencer, I actually hate the word now. It's become such a buzzword. There has been influencer inflation over the last 5 years, where everybody now is an influencer. If you're not a macro influencer, you're a micro influencer. When these words become buzzwords, they lose their meaning. And when they have too many meanings or lose their meaning, you can't think clearly about the underlying phenomenon. So I'm going to use the word influencer, but I'm not happy about it. So let's first talk about what isn't influence and what's not, who isn't an influencer. Generic distribution is not influence, right? So just because somebody has followers doesn't mean that they influence those followers or other people. And the trend of micro-influencers, when you're connecting with people within a particular community and a tribe, it can work. But we already have a term, we already have a phrase for the extreme version of micro-influence, and it's called word of mouth, right? And it's been known in the advertising industry for decades, and it's something that's very difficult to buy or to manufacture. There's an organic quality to it where you can only fake it so far. You can generate a little bit of buzz maybe up front, but if the underlying fundamentals aren't good, you're not going to get real word of mouth. So, and influencers are not a magic wand. I meet so many founders who, I see the influencer slide in the deck. Everybody has one these days. And they have this idea that influencer is going to wave this magic wand, and it's going to turn a bad product into a good product. And we can't do that, right? So the most important thing is that founders need to create a good product or a great product. And combined with influencers in the right tribe, that can be very powerful. But it's not a magic wand. Influence is basically two things in my book. It is motivating followers or a tribe to take an action. And it is changing the overall conversation on a subject, often through domain expertise or experience. That's sort of the fundamentals in my mind of influence. Just to give you a few examples, in terms of taking an action, one of the best I've ever seen is Melissa Hartwig-Urban of Whole30. She's a force of nature, and she gets people to take action. There are actually a lot of dietary approaches that will work if people actually follow them. The reality is most people don't exercise and they don't avoid processed foods. And if you move and avoid processed foods, there are a lot of things that will work. So she's amazing, and we can talk more about Whole30 in terms of tribe building. In terms of expertise, Dr. David Perlmutter, a neurologist, of all the people who talk about gluten and gluten-free, I find him the most credible because he sort of combines an establishment, sort of mainstream authority and expertise with forward thinking and really staying on top of the science. So when people talk about influencers, motivating action and domain expertise, whether through experience or knowledge. So when we come to tribes, unfortunately is another word that's overused. It's also a bit of a buzzword, but we'll use it. I actually tend to, and it's sort of unavoidable. We came up with the title together. So I actually, when I think about these groups, I actually think about cults, not tribes. Cults has a bit of a negative connotation, and I use the term in a more positive sense, sort of in the sense of culture and the origins, or like the early stages. Like what do you call a successful cult? It's a religion, so tribes have their own culture and rituals. They have their own vocabulary. I can't tell you how many times I have seen a founder reach out to somebody in the CrossFit space and they misspell the word CrossFit. They don't capitalize the F. As soon as I see that, it's just like, okay, this person is not part of the tribe. They can't even get the name right. Get the name right. Otherwise, I'm not, you're not doing your homework, so I'm not going to take you seriously. It's a really small thing. Tribes have their own community. And tribes have an outgroup. The reality is that just in terms of in-group, out-group psychology, one of the best ways to form an in-group is to have a common enemy. If it's the USSR, right? It unified a lot of the capitalist Western world in opposition to this giant enemy for decades. And when that common enemy goes away, then you see a fracturing. Tribes that are harder to join are more effective than ones that are easier to join. If you're trying to create a true in-group connection. And again, this is, it's a little bit counterintuitive, but this idea of upfront sacrifice and then longer-term reward is a big element in successful tribes or successful cults or religions. If you have to work for it to gain entrance, if you look at hunter-gatherer cultures, they all have these coming-of-age rituals, and they're often coming-of-age rituals for males and for females, and it's some trial that you have to go through. The men's are usually more physical. The female ones tend to have more to do with fertility, and once you pass through, you're considered an adult member of the tribe. But to the present, as a present-day example, Whole30 didn't succeed because it's easy. Whole30 succeeded because it's hard but achievable. It can't be impossible, but hard but achievable, where people do make a sacrifice. One of the features of Whole30 that has been so successful is the whole is important and the 30 is important, right? Because if you say to people, you're going to have to make a dietary change for the rest of your life, not a lot of people are going to, they're like, I'm not sure I want to join that. Like, what am I getting into here? But 30 days, everybody can do 30 days of something. And because it's a limited time period, you can actually make it harder. And when you make it harder, people get better results. And when people get better results, they have a positive experience. And it gives them momentum to continue making changes. So I see people make the mistake with tribes all the time where they want to make it easier. Here, join my tribe, join my tribe. No, what's more effective is like, no, you can't join my tribe. There's velvet rope, and you have to do something to get into it. But it's not, like, it actually has to be paired with legitimate long-term fundamental benefits from taking those actions. Otherwise, people, will try it, and they won't get a benefit, and then they disappear. They're like, yeah, what's the point of being in this? So that's another area where Whole30, it does change their people's relationships with food. Melissa likes to say, if I wanted it to be a permanent change for the rest of your life, eating exactly that way, I would have called it Whole365, but it's not called that. It's called Whole30. And then you need to find your own healthy relationship with food after that. Another feature that's very effective. On the community side, there are a lot of examples of people who do a good job with community, but to take an old school brand, I mean, Weight Watchers. Weight Watchers' nutritional program is nothing to write home about, but what they got right, and what they got very right, is they get a bunch of people into a room together to support each other and to hold each other accountable. And that's a big deal. Decades later, it's still a big deal. There are a lot of dietary approaches that will work with community support and social accountability. So never forget the power of community. Like, you can build a multi-billion-dollar brand by getting people into a room together. In terms of working with influencers, when startups and founders want to work with influencers, first, some common mistakes that I see, in addition to the ones I've already mentioned, like spell the words right. A-list celebrities are massively overrated. I live in LA, I see this all the time. People, young founders have stars in their eyes, and oh, so-and-so wants to invest. And my expectation with any A-list celebrity getting involved is zero. Zero. If they do anything above zero, I'm pleasantly surprised. And there's an exception to this, but the issues are A-listers have huge egos, they're hard to work with. They're expensive. They're highly compensated in other domains, by a vodka company or whatever. So they expect, their time to be worth a certain amount that doesn't back out for startup math. They're often quite wealthy, so a $25K check isn't meaningful to them. So okay, they do invest, but is skin in the game meaningful? If somebody's worth $50 million or $100 million, a $25K check just isn't something they're going to pay attention to. And perhaps most importantly, they didn't, for the most part, A-list celebrities did not build their own platforms. They inherited them by being famous. And so they are generally not surrounded by talented people in the digital space. Their teams are people that are optimized for Hollywood, their primary industry, which is the appropriate decision for them to make given where their income comes from. Or their second cousin runs their Instagram or something like that. And so it's actually, when you work with figures who have their own sort of professional or semi-professional digital marketing teams, it becomes easier to start working with underlings and just put the teams in touch and be like, okay, we're going to do an email campaign. What does your promotional calendar look like? And you don't have to get some A-listers, attention. The exception is when a brand pairs itself off with one A-lister who's a really good fit. And we've seen this, whether it's Jessica Alba and Honest, or George Clooney and Casamigos, or 50 Cent and Vitamin Water. There are a bunch of these. Those tend to work much better. And in those cases, people spend way more time on fit, making sure that this is the right person for their product and their brand. So thinking more, long-term fundamentals than, sort of short-term star-in-your-eyes status seeking. And making sure they have serious skin in the game. That's not just financial, it's also reputational. Because celebrities, man, if there's one thing they care about, it's what other people think of them. So that's the case where it works. But I see party rounds all the time, and people excited, and I'm like, come back to me in 2 years and see who's done anything. And it varies. There are exceptions. I mean, Jillian Michaels, amazing. Her team's really competent. She's great. She works with Thrive Market as an investor. In some ways, I don't think of her as the typical Hollywood A-lister. She's bootstrapped it a little bit more. She's great. So some of the types of relationships you can have with influencers. First, I think a lot of people forget this in like all the hype about influencers. You can have a purely love-based relationship with influencers where they just like, you make a great product and they love your stuff and they talk about it and there's no financial transaction involved, right? And the good thing about that is, first, when those influencers then talk about the product, they don't have to say, oh, this is, hashtag ad, hashtag, sponsorship, sponsored post, or whatever. It's a more authentic recommendation to say, I'm not being compensated for this. You can give people free product. There's cash compensation upfront or performance-based based on commissions. Then there's people can get compensated with advisory equity. Again, that could be upfront or performance-based, like Thrive Market did with a big program. And then there's investment. There's actual skin in the game. I tend to like things on the polls, and so I encourage founders to have love-based relationships with influencers. One example of this would be Mark Sisson and Primal Kitchen with Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan is his own man. He can't be bribed. You can buy a sponsorship on his podcast, but there's a big filter there too. And he just would post about the Chipotle lime mayo, Primal Kitchen's Chipotle lime mayo, and it would be a picture of medium rare elk with jalapenos, hashtag healthy AF. And he'd send that out to millions of followers, and it was nothing that was planned or arranged or compensated for, and it was phenomenal. It was absolutely phenomenal. And then on the other pole is the investment side, and I think founders should, when they're thinking about any type of relationship with an influencer, first focus on the ones that you can have a love-based relationship with, and then if you want to deepen it with a financial relationship, then those are good candidates to do so. I generally advise against any startup from giving advisory options to somebody who is not investing, unless it's very clear, the value that they can provide. But skin in the game is a very meaningful thing. It's really important. If people aren't willing, it switches the whole dynamic around. Instead of the startup giving cash to the influencer, it's the influencer giving cash to the startup, right? When people have skin in their game, it really changes the behavior. The two best messages from influencers to their audiences about a product are, I'm not being compensated, on the one hand, and I love this so much that I gave them my money and invested. Those are the two best messages. The stuff in the middle where it's like, yeah, they bought me for 15K sort of thing doesn't resonate quite as much, and people have limited attention spans, and like everybody's doing the influencer approach now. And when you think about, we think a lot about fit. Wild Ventures thinks about fit, I would say, more than virtually any other fund, because if our group, some of the folks in our group, Melissa Hartwig-Urban, Mark Sisson, Chris Kresser, Rob Wolf, Joe DeSena of Spartan Race, a lot of people like that. Like, if those people are going to promote something, their personal reputation and brand and platforms is worth more to them than a 25K investment. So if they are going to promote something, they do not want blowback. It has to be in line with their values and their identity and their nutritional philosophy and what they believe in. because, if it's not, and they don't want to promote something, like I'm put in the position of having to like twist arms, and that's not fun for me to do. It deteriorates, damages the relationship. So I want something. When we look at opportunities, I think in my head, 5 years from now, is my group still going to be excited about promoting this product or this company? And a lot of the affiliate world is very short-term, cash-based, transactional, and we try to switch the framework to ultra long-term. So it's not a one-night stand, it's a marriage, right? It's a lifelong marriage. And you look for different qualities in a partner in those scenarios. And you tend to need to look at like long-term fundamentals more. Are the nutritionals good? Like, does this have a good purpose? Is this changing the food system and supply chain in a positive way? Are we happy to spread this message to our audiences? So that's that's sort of like the fundamental, the fundamentals that we look for, and nothing substitutes for having a great product. With all this hype about influencer stuff, building a great product and building a great brand is the most important thing, and then pairing that with these direct forms of distribution and influencers, that's when it gets really powerful. So those are the quick thoughts, and I guess we're going to do a little Q&A here if people have more questions.
Thank you, John. That was terrific.
Thanks.
Here, come sit over here. Don't be scared, caveman. So I just want to go in a little bit deeper on how I bring Wild Ventures on board and what form that investment takes. Is it time, posts, money?
Yeah, so we make 4 to 5 investments a year. They range in check size ranges from $300K to $1 million, usually around 400, 500K. We stack that allocation with as many influencers as possible. Most companies have minimum check sizes. We have maximum check sizes typically because we want to get as many people in there as possible, and we can accommodate smaller, a 5K check from someone with a big podcast, if that's meaningful money to them, that's a thing of beauty. Before we make a decision on an investment, we spend a lot of time on fit, and I ask Wellness Mama and Melissa and the Thrive Market co-founders, all financial stuff aside, we don't look at valuation, we don't look at any financial stuff. I dig into that first. I just say, do you love this? And I get their feedback. And is it something that you would be willing to promote, not just once, but over the course of years? I can't tell you how many things we turn down that look like they're taking off or are taking off, and they have too much sugar in them. It's just such an easy no from us. It's like you don't know who we are if you think that we're going to invest in something with like all this sugar in it. So that's that's where we start, and then where we help is on different channel strategy. We do try to help companies get stocked at Thrive, or maybe they already are there and they can intensify that relationship. We do a lot of work on email. And helping portfolio companies crack the email ecosystem. You can't go to a single agency or tech company and get access to tons of emails in the same way that you can with just Facebook, Instagram. There are 1,000 points of access to Facebook and Instagram. It's just not that hard to access. So it's pairing it with somebody who's influential, but then we also focus on other channels. We work on email. We help them craft affiliate offers so that they can work with the mercenaries. There are a lot of mercenaries out there, and we'll help them structure commissions so that those are attractive to people who are motivated purely, by the financials. So that's some of the.
Just going a little further.
Yeah.
Is there a financial equivalent on the kind of influence you're exerting? So there's money in, and then there's, so a lot of celebrities get paid for time.
Yeah, we don't we don't think about it quite in that way. When I talk to founders, the benefits, I'll typically say is first, well, there are 7 to 8 major benefits for direct-to-consumer sales at the beginning. Own the customer relationship, higher margin, better cash flow, cheaper, less risky new product launches, generate awareness at the same time, and more leverage when you're going out to negotiate. Get people on subscription, more leverage when you're going out to negotiate. So what we tell founders is control. You work with us, you're going to have more control over your destiny, and you're going to build a business with better fundamentals where if you do need to raise money, you'll be able to do it in any climate. And we think about the online side as a two-pronged thing. To use a military metaphor, it's air power in a land war. You can't, it's actually hard, you can't really win a war with air power alone, but if you have to fight a land war, it sure helps to have an air force. So we think of it as really focusing online for the first 2 years, and then use that to generate cash, have bank accounts going up every month. It can happen in the food and beverage industry. And use online to generate cash to self-finance the more expensive move into brick and mortar.
Yeah, and that move into brick and mortar.
Yeah.
At what point? What are some of the best approaches for mobilizing your air support for that move? Is it communication? Like, is there a point person who's communicating with all those influencers that we're doing this, or should a company's online communications operation grow to reach its influencers sort of commensurate with the brand's growth?
Yeah, so with all of our investments, I make sure that the portfolio companies have a direct relationship with the influencers and their teams so that I'm not a bottleneck. There's still not a great way of tying online impact to brick and mortar, promos and things like that. People have tried various mechanisms. What we do see, it's easier to get stocked at a retailer than to stay stocked. And so if you go in with a bunch of brand awareness and already have an online following and fans, you just see higher velocities. I can't give you an equation or directly tie it together, but that's what we see happening over and over.
So we know keto, paleo, all the O's out there. What are some other communities that are on the rise?
Yeah, one general theme is that even though people talk about paleo going up and down and the rise of keto and whatever. Broadly, there has been a significant rise in, if you look at the food tribes that are lowish carb and moving away from processed foods and grains in particular, that collective number continues to go up. So while people aren't searching as much for paleo anymore, going grain-free, I'm short gluten-free, but I'm long grain-free, if that makes sense. Other tribes that I sort of pay attention to, there's been a little bubbling of the carnivore world, which is hilarious, just in terms of the reactions it gets from people. I did carnivore for a month and had a great experience. Jordan Peterson is doing carnivore. It's great for people with autoimmune conditions.
And that's another growing group, right? Is the allergen community?
Autoimmune is one of the set of autoimmune conditions continues to rise over decades. It's extremely concerning from a public health.
Yeah, it's like, way to go, America.
Yeah, well, and it's not just America. It's the entire developed world. It's some combination of overuse of antibiotics and destroying our guts, our gut microbiome with shitty foods and all these different things. But autoimmune is an underreported story because nobody wants to be the person who talks to a reporter about their IBS. Seriously, nobody wants to be known as the person who had the shits.
Speaking as the reporter, we don't really want to talk about it either.
And if somebody changes how they eat, and 4 days later their IBS symptoms clear up, whereas for 20 years they've had to stay within 50 yards of a bathroom at all times, and now that clears up, they don't go back. Those people don't go back, but they also don't really talk about why they've made this permanent change. So autoimmune is a huge issue, and we pay attention a lot to it when we think about, the communities that we reach and what we invest in.
Still don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you very much, John.
Thank you.